you're looking to upgrade your sewing kit with tools that make sewing easier, quicker and more professional looking, this video is for you. In this video, I'll walk you through some incredibly useful sewing extras you absolutely don't need but may end up loving once you try them. I've already made a video covering the essential sewing tools you need, which I've linked below if you're just getting started. And if you'd like to pick up any of the tools I mention, I've linked everything in the description below as well. Firstly, an expanding sewing gauge is brilliant for evenly spacing things like buttonholes, pleats, tucks and decorative details without having to constantly measure each section individually. You simply expand it to the spacing you want and it keeps everything perfectly even across your project. A flexible curve ruler is amazing for pattern drafting and alterations because it bends into smooth curves and actually holds its shape. It's especially useful for shaping armholes, necklines, hips and curved seams where standard rulers just don't work very well. Patchwork templates are fantastic if you enjoy quilting or patchwork because they make cutting repeated shapes far quicker and far more accurate. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and they really help keep your pieces consistent, which makes assembling things like quilts so much easier later on. Precision scales are highly accurate digital scales used to measure tiny amounts of weight. In sewing and textiles, they're commonly paired with a GSM cutter to calculate fabric weight, making them useful for working out what size needle and thickness of thread to choose for sewing. A protractor is a smaller, useful drafting tool designed to measure and draw precise angles when pattern making. It's especially helpful for drafting geometric shapes, creating accurate pattern pieces, and marking angles cleanly when designing or altering patterns. A small measuring gauge is perfect for checking seam allowances, measuring hems, spacing buttons, marking pleats, and making tiny adjustments without pulling out a full tape measure every time. A quilter's quarter is especially useful for quilting because it helps you quickly add accurate quarter-inch seam allowances around templates and shapes. And a variform curve ruler, a specialist pattern drafting tool that's incredibly useful for creating smooth, professional curves on sewing patterns. Different parts of the ruler are shaped for different areas of the body, so it's brilliant for refining necklines, armholes, princess seams and other curved sections. Coloured pens and pencils are incredibly useful when drafting or altering patterns because they make complicated markings much easier to read. Using different colours for seam lines, alterations, grain lines or notes can make your patterns far less confusing. And use a pencil sharpener to sharpen your pencils. Sharp pencils give you much finer, more accurate markings, especially when drafting patterns or marking detailed sewing lines. A compass is perfect for drawing circles and curved pattern pieces like circle skirts, rounded pockets or scallop details. It's especially useful if you enjoy pattern drafting or creating your own designs. A fabric rubber is really handy for removing temporary chalk or pencil markings from fabric without damaging the material underneath. It's particularly useful in lighter fabrics where markings can sometimes linger. A pattern drill is commonly used in professional pattern making to create tiny holes for markings like the apex of darts, pleat placements or pocket positions. It makes transferring markings from pattern to fabric much quicker and more accurate. And you can also use it to cut holes in the patterns to then hang them up on a pattern hook for future use. A pattern notcher punches small notches into the edge of your pattern pieces to mark important construction points. It gives much cleaner, more consistent notches than scissors, and it's especially useful if you do a lot of pattern drafting. And always a really useful little tool for pattern drafting and eyelet work. It's great for anchoring a specific point on a pattern while pivoting the paper around it. And it's also useful for piercing holes for eyelets and hardware. A craft knife is brilliant for cutting materials that are too thick or awkward for normal scissors, like cardboard, vinyl or mountboard. It's also fantastic for intricate appliqué work where precision really matters. Just make sure you always use it with a cutting mat and a metal ruler. A scissors sharpener is one of those overlooked but important tools that genuinely makes a difference. Sharp scissors give cleaner cuts, reduce hand strain and make sewing much more enjoyable overall. Weights are a brilliant alternative to pinning. Instead of pinning your pattern pieces down, you simply place weights on top to hold everything flat while cutting. This technique works best when cutting with a rotary cutter and a cutting mat. Weights are especially useful in delicate, slippy, stretchy or pin-sensitive fabrics like silk, jersey, latex or swimwear fabrics. A GSM Fabric Cutter is a specialist circular cutting tool used to cut a perfectly precise fabric sample for calculating fabric GSM or grams per square metre. The fabric sample is weighed on precision scales to determine the fabric's weight, helping assess suitable needles, threads and other uses for the material. Wire cutters are essential if you ever work with corsetry, millinery wire, heavy zips, or anything involving metal components. And remember, never use your fabric scissors to cut wire unless you want to completely ruin them. Beeswax is amazing for hand sewing as it makes it much smoother and less frustrating. Before you begin stitching, simply run your thread through the wax to coat it. This quick process makes the thread stronger and helps prevent it from tangling and knotting as you sew. A bodkin is incredibly useful for threading elastic, ribbon or cords through casings. If you've ever spent 20 minutes fighting with a waistband casing, you'll understand why people love these. Curved needles are especially useful for quilting, upholstery and awkward hand sewing where straight needles are difficult to manoeuvre. They're brilliant for ladder stitching and quilt basting. Hemming clips are a special type of fabric clip that slip easily over folded fabric and feature measurements serving as a miniature ruler. They are designed specifically to hold hems securely in place while you measure, press and sew, ensuring your hem is perfectly even all the way round without the need for pinning. A leather thimble is much softer and more flexible than a traditional metal thimble, which many people find more comfortable for long periods of hand sewing. They're especially popular in quilting and embroidery. A magnetic seam guide attaches to your sewing machine and acts as a physical guide for sewing perfectly straight seams. It's especially helpful for beginners or for long seams where accuracy matters. Just avoid using them on computerized sewing machines because strong magnets can interfere with electronics. A needle threader is invaluable if you struggle threading needles. It makes threading both hand needles and sewing machine needles much quicker and far less frustrating. An overlocker or serger is not essential, but is if you want to give your projects a professional finish. As you sew, an upper and a lower blade act like a pair of scissors to trim away excess fabric. At the same time, multiple threads simultaneously loop over the newly cut edge to bind the seam and prevent the fabric from fraying or unravelling. And there are so many specialist pins out there for different fabrics and techniques. Bridal and lace pins are finer for delicate fabrics, appliqué pins are tiny for detailed work, sequin pins are extra short, and straight and curved safety pins are fantastic for quilting. And finally, specialist presser feet. There are so many available for different techniques, and as there are far too many to cover, I have a separate video explaining the many types and their uses, which I've linked in the description below. A sleeve board is basically a miniature ironing board designed for pressing narrow areas like sleeves and trouser legs. It makes pressing small, tubular sections so much easier. A sleeve roll is another brilliant pressing aid for sleeves, trouser legs and narrow seams. Its rounded shape prevents seam allowances from leaving impressions on the right side of the fabric. A needleboard is specifically designed for pressing fabrics with a pile like velvet or corduroy. The tiny upright needles stop the pile from getting crushed while pressing. If you don't have a needleboard, a steamer is fantastic for removing wrinkles from delicate or textured fabrics like velvet and corduroy that could be damaged by direct ironing. It's also brilliant for preparing fabrics that are prone to shrinking and are dry clean only before cutting and sewing. A wooden clapper helps flatten bulky seams and locks creases into place using pressure after steaming. They're especially useful in heavier fabrics where seams can become bulky. A point presser and clapper combo tool is even better, amazing for collars, cuffs, lapels and sharp corners. It helps you press awkward areas beautifully flat and crisp. A pressing mat lets you turn almost any flat surface into a small, temporary ironing station, which is incredibly useful if you don't always want to set up a full ironing board. A seam roller is perfect for fabrics that can't handle heat like leather or latex. Instead of ironing, you physically roll the seam flat. A leather roller works similarly, and it's specifically designed for flattening leather seams without damaging the material with heat. A bias tape maker is a very handy gadget available in different sizes. You feed fabric through it and it folds the edges under perfectly to create your own custom bias binding incredibly quickly. A corner and edge shaper helps push out corners and edges after turning items right side out. It gives collars, cuffs, cushions and bags much sharper, cleaner corners. A tailor's dummy or dress form is helpful for fitting garments, checking proportions and seeing how garments hang in 3 dimensions. Both adjustable and fixed size dummies are available, and you can customise them with padding to match your body shape more accurately. A loop turner is designed for turning narrow fabric tubes right side out. It's brilliant for rouleau loops, thin straps, bridal fastenings and delicate ties. Pattern hooks are a really simple but useful organisation tool for hanging and storing pattern pieces neatly together, especially useful if you draft your own patterns. A tacking gun is often used in quilting instead of safety pins to temporarily hold quilt layers together much faster. A hand press is used for attaching hardware like eyelets, snaps, poppers and grommets. If you work with bags, corsetry, leatherwork or accessories, this is very helpful. And finally, a chisel and wood block, which are used to cut open buttonholes beautifully cleanly without risking accidentally slicing through your stitching with a seam ripper. And there you have it, a collection of advanced sewing tools you can add to your sewing kit. For more sewing Bexpertise, I've linked helpful videos in the description below. Please don't forget to subscribe, and as always, happy sewing!